Boar huddled beside the flickering hearth, eyes darting to the shadowed entrance of the cave as the wind howled outside. How did early humans outsmart the nighttime wolf pack? The answer lies in a blend of clever engineering, social coordination, and raw survival instincts that archaeologists have pieced together from stone tools, cave paintings, and animal bone assemblages. First, early humans understood that wolves hunted in packs precisely because they could overwhelm a lone prey or a solitary camper under cover of darkness. To counter this, they built communal sleeping areas deep within rock shelters, often on raised platforms of stone or compacted earth. These platforms created a dry, insulated floor that stayed several degrees warmer than the cold stone beneath, reducing heat loss and keeping the group together in one compact mass. By sleeping shoulder to shoulder, they shared body heat, a simple but effective communal warming system that could raise the microclimate inside the shelter by up to 5 degrees Celsius. But warmth wasn't enough. The real defense was fire. Evidence from sites like Kostenki and Zhaokudian shows that Upper Paleolithic peoples mastered the bow drill and hand drill techniques, producing sparks even in sub-zero conditions. Once a blaze was lit, they used a combination of dry pine bark, fungus-laden tinder, and animal fat to keep it burning through the night. The glow and crackle of fire served 3 purposes. It emitted light, deterring wolves that preferred darkness. It produced smoke that masked human scent, and it created a barrier of heat that wolves were reluctant to cross. Social organization played a crucial role, too. Anthropologists have identified a sentinel system. While most of the group slept, a rotating pair of guards kept watch from a low ledge, armed with sharpened spears or stone-tipped javelins. These sentinels were often the strongest, most experienced hunters, often older members whose knowledge of wolf behavior was invaluable. If a wolf approached, they would hurl a spear or shout a warning, prompting the rest of the group to scramble to the fire, where the flames provided both a physical and psychological shield. In addition to active defense, early humans employed passive tricks. Excavations reveal layers of crushed stones and ash at cave entrances, suggesting that people deliberately spread sharp, heat-resistant gravel to make the floor uncomfortable for a wolf's padded paws. Some sites even show evidence of bone fences, rows of broken animal bones laid across the threshold, creating a noisy, rattling barrier that could startle a predator. Finally, diet and hunting strategy reduced the need for nightly vigilance. By focusing on large, seasonally abundant game, bison, mammoth, and reindeer, early groups could store meat in cold, stable pits lined with stone and covered by insulating layers of moss and fur. This surplus meant they could afford to stay in one place longer, reducing the frequency of risky nighttime forays that would expose them to wolves. So, through a combination of insulated sleeping platforms, ever-burning fire, sentinel watches, clever use of terrain, and strategic food storage, early humans turned the night from a wolf-filled nightmare into a manageable, even communal, part of their daily rhythm. The next time you hear a distant howl, remember that those ancient ancestors were already mastering the art of outsmarting the pack, one glowing ember at a time. How could a family of Upper Paleolithic foragers keep a hungry bear out of their nighttime headquarters when the temperature outside dropped to -30 and the wind howled like a pack of wolves? The answer isn't a stonecutter's fort or a metal lock. It's a clever combination of location, architecture, and low-tech engineering that turned ordinary caves into bear-proof shelters. First, scientists have found that most sites chosen for winter occupation sit on natural overhangs or deep rock shelters, where the entrance is narrow, low, and often hidden behind a rock ledge. In the French Pyrenees, the famous Grotte du Lazaret shows a threshold only about 80 cm high, just enough for a crouching human but too tight for a full-grown brown bear. The entrance was further narrowed by dragging a large slab of limestone across the mouth, creating a stone door that could be slid into place after each outing. Inside, the walls were not left bare. Archaeologists have identified layers of compacted animal hide, grass, and even powdered limestone plastered onto the floor and lower walls. This served 2 purposes. It insulated the space, keeping heat from the central fire from escaping, and it created a rough, uneven surface that a bear's claws could not get a purchase on. In the Altai region, researchers discovered a thick mat of reindeer skin stitched together with sinew and then weighted down with stones, essentially an early bear carpet. Ventilation was a critical challenge because a fire is a lifesaver in a sub-zero cave, but also a beacon for predators. Paleolithic peoples solved this by drilling tiny air holes high in the ceiling, often just a few centimeters wide, which allowed smoke to rise while remaining too small for a bear's snout. In some sites, a second, lower opening was covered with a removable skin flap that could be opened for fresh air and then quickly shut if a bear approached. The placement of the fire itself was strategic. Rather than setting the blaze in the center of the shelter, they built a low stone hearth against the far wall, shielding the flames from wind and limiting the amount of heat that reached the entrance. The resulting temperature gradient kept the interior comfortably warm, sometimes up to 15 degrees C, while the air near the doorway stayed near freezing, discouraging a bear from lingering. Finally, the occupants used noise and scent as a deterrent. Before settling down, they would rub a bundle of pine resin or dried moss on their bodies and on the entrance. The strong, unfamiliar smell, combined with the occasional clatter of stones being shifted, made the shelter seem occupied by a larger, more aggressive creature. All of these elements, narrow, camouflaged entrances, insulated interiors, tiny ventilation shafts, strategic hearth placement, and scent barriers, worked together to turn a simple limestone alcove into a predator-resistant fortress. Modern experiments with replica shelters show that a bear will indeed balk at a doorway that requires it to duck, squeeze, and navigate a slick, uneven floor while being greeted by unfamiliar odors. So the next time you imagine a woolly mammoth-sized predator prowling outside a frozen night camp, remember that our ancestors didn't just rely on brute strength. They used clever design, observation, and the materials right at hand to keep the bears out and the fire burning. How did our Ice Age ancestors turn a jagged rock or a piece of bone into a hunting tool fast enough to keep a hungry wolf at bay? The answer lies in a blend of observation, trial and error, and a surprisingly efficient workshop that could produce a functional spear or cutting edge in a single daylight shift. First, the raw material. In the open steppe and the rocky shelters of the Upper Paleolithic, people collected flint, chert, or quartzite nodules that cracked predictably. Experiments at sites like Dolny Vestonis and Kostenki show that a skilled knapper could split a 200-gram flake into a usable blade in under 10 minutes. The technique is called direct percussion. A hammerstone, often a rounded quartz pebble, strikes the core at a precise angle, snapping off a sharp piece. The resulting edge, though thin, is hard enough to slice through tendons and hide. Evidence of repeated pressure flaking, where a pointed antler or bone tool refines the edge, appears on dozens of artifacts, indicating that even within a single day the hunter could sharpen a blade to a fine, durable point. When stone was scarce, bone became the go-to material. Large mammoth ribs, elk femurs, or even the dense shaft of a horse metacarpal were split longitudinally using a sharp stone edge. The split halves were then whittled with a smaller flake, creating a spear tip that could be hafted onto a wooden shaft. Archaeologists have found microscopic wear patterns on such bone, points that match the stress of thrusting into flesh, confirming their use as weapons. Hafting, the crucial step that turns a point into a spear, relied on natural adhesives. Charred plant fibers, like the inner bark of willow, were twisted into cords, while the heat-softened resin from pine or spruce trees acted as a glue. In the chilly air of a glacial winter, the resin would harden quickly, locking the point to the shaft. Experiments replicating these methods show that a hunter could prepare the adhesive, apply it, and secure a spear in roughly 30 minutes. All of this could be done in a single 24-hour cycle. Field studies at sites such as the Lascaux Caves suggest that groups would gather raw materials in the morning, work through the afternoon making multiple points, and then test them on large game carcasses during the evening hunt. The leftover flakes and bone shavings found in hearth layers confirm that the process was both rapid and repeatable. So, when you picture a lone hunter braving -30 degrees C winds, remember that his survival hinged not on magical craftsmanship, but on a practical, time-tested sequence. Select the right stone or bone, knock off a sharp flake, refine the edge, shape a wooden shaft, and bind it all together with resin and cord. In less than a day, a Paleolithic person could go from raw material to a lethal weapon, enough to secure meat, defend the camp, and keep the tribe alive through another harsh winter. How did a band of people with no radios, no night vision goggles, and no electric fences keep wolves, bears, and rival groups from slipping into their camp after the sun went down? The answer isn't a single watchtower, but a whole social system that turned the tribe itself into a living alarm clock. When the daylight faded, the group would gather around the central fire, the only reliable source of heat and light. Archaeologists have found charcoal concentrations in dozens of Upper Paleolithic sites that show the fire was kept burning through the night, not merely for warmth, but because it marked the watch zone. Around the fire, the strongest and most experienced hunters, often the men who had just returned from a successful kill, would take the first shift. Their job was simple: stay upright, keep the flames fed, and listen. The human ear, tuned by millennia of living in open landscapes, can pick up the faint rustle of a bear's paws on snow or the low growl of a wolf pack 100 meters away. When the first watch grew tired, a second group, often older adults or adolescents, took over. This rotation was not random. Researchers studying the wear patterns on Neanderthal teeth and the distribution of fire ash layers at sites like Dolny Vestonis suggest that night duties were scheduled in 2-hour blocks, allowing enough rest to avoid hypothermia. The presence of multiple shifts also meant that if a predator breached the perimeter, there were fresh eyes ready to react, reducing the chance of a single, exhausted guard being overwhelmed. Children, surprisingly, played a role too. In many Ice Age sites, small hearths are found on the periphery of the main fire pit, where youngsters were allowed to sit under adult supervision. Their giggles and occasional shouts acted as an extra layer of acoustic detection. Any sudden silence would immediately alert an adult that something was wrong. Finally, the tribe's social norms reinforced vigilance. A breach of the night watch was considered a grave offense, sometimes resulting in a loss of status or even exile. This cultural pressure ensured that every member understood the stakes. A failed night watch could mean loss of food, injury, or death for the whole group. In the end, the Ice Age people didn't need high-tech security systems. They built a cooperative, rotating guard system, kept the fire alive, and turned the entire community into a living alarm that could sense danger long before it reached the sleeping bodies huddled under furs. How could a hunter-gatherer step out of a snowdrift at night and walk past a prowling wolf without being sniffed out? The answer, surprisingly, lies in something we all know from modern kitchens: animal fat. Archaeologists have uncovered residues of rendered marrow and blubber on stone tools and in fire pits dating back to the Upper Paleolithic. And experimental archaeologists have shown that early humans deliberately smeared these greasy substances on their clothing, skin, and even their shelters. The trick works because fat is an excellent odor-blocking agent. It creates a thin, hydrophobic film that traps volatile compounds, those tiny molecules that carry the scent of sweat, urine, and blood. When a hunter coated his fur or hides with a layer of seal or reindeer fat, the scent molecules became trapped inside the oil matrix instead of diffusing into the cold air. Scientists believe this practice was especially crucial during the last glacial maximum, when temperatures plunged below 30 degrees C and the wind could carry a scent for kilometers. Ethnographic records from Arctic Inuit and Sami peoples, who still use animal fat to waterproof gear, echo this ancient habit, suggesting a continuity of knowledge that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Experiments in cold chambers have demonstrated that a simple coat of bear or elk fat can reduce the detection distance of a human scent by up to 50%, giving a crucial time window for slipping past a hungry predator or avoiding a rival clan's ambush. But the trick wasn't just about staying invisible to wolves. In many cave sites, researchers have found charred layers of animal fat mixed with ash, indicating that early people also used the substance to seal the entrances of their shelters. By spreading a thin film of fat on the stone threshold, they could dampen the scent that wafted out from cooking fires, making the interior less detectable to scavenging bears or wolves that would otherwise be drawn by the smell of meat. The same layer also helped to keep the wind out, reducing heat loss, a dual benefit in the icy world of the Pleistocene. Even the process of making the fat was a skillful ritual. To render marrow or blubber, groups would dig a shallow pit, line it with stones, and place the raw material inside. Over a low, steady flame, often maintained by a continuously fed pile of dry grass, the fat would melt, separate from the meat, and pool at the bottom of the pit. The resulting liquid could be strained through woven plant fibers, stored in hollowed-out bone vessels, and reapplied whenever a fresh coat was needed. Because the fat solidified quickly in sub-zero temperatures, it formed a durable, water-resistant layer that could be scraped off and reapplied without melting away in a sudden storm. So when you hear the phrase, blood barrier trick, think of it not as a mystical spell, but as a clever, low-tech solution rooted in chemistry and survival instinct. by masking their own scent with animal fat. Paleolithic people bought themselves precious minutes, minutes that could mean the difference between a successful hunt and becoming dinner for the very animals they were trying to outwit. How could a hunter who only had a stone axe and a handful of animal hides possibly bring down a saber-toothed tiger without a spear the size of a canoe? The answer, surprisingly, is that they didn't need massive weapons at all. They used clever, low-tech traps that turned the predator's own speed and power against it. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of shallow pits, sometimes lined with sharpened wooden stakes or broken bone points, at sites ranging from the cold caves of the Altai to the open tundra of Siberia. These quick-fix traps were not permanent constructions. They were built in a single day using only what the hunters could carry or find nearby. First, the hunters would scout a game trail or a known predator pathway, often identified by fresh tracks, scrapes, or even the scent of a recent kill. They would dig a pit about a meter deep and a meter across, covering it with a thin layer of pine needles, moss, or snow that blended perfectly with the surrounding ground. The covering was so light that the animal's weight would collapse it without warning. In many cases, the pit walls were tipped with sharp stakes, usually fashioned from split hardwood, hardened by fire, and sometimes tipped with flint or even antler spikes. When a saber-tooth lunged forward, its massive forelimbs would drive it straight into the concealed hole, impaling it on the stakes, or at least trapping it long enough for a group of hunters to rush in. Experimental archaeology has shown that even a pit only 30 centimeters deep can be lethal if the stakes are angled correctly. The key was placement. Hunters set the traps at choke points, such as narrow passes between rock outcrops or the edge of a frozen river where the animal had to slow down. In colder climates, the frozen ground made digging easier, and the ice itself could serve as a natural cover. When the predator fell, the cold air of the pit would quickly sicken it, buying the hunters precious minutes. Evidence of these traps also comes from wear patterns on stone tools found near pit sites. Microscopic scratches indicate repeated use of sharp wooden spikes, while charred remains of pine bark suggest that fire was used to harden the stakes. Some sites even contain the broken jaws of saber-toothed felines, still lodged in the stake holes, providing the most direct proof that these traps actually worked. What's fascinating is how quickly these traps could be set up and abandoned. When the season changed or the predator routes shifted, the hunters simply covered the pit with a layer of snow or earth and moved on. This mobility meant that a small band of people could protect their camp without spending months building massive fortifications. And because the traps required only simple tools, stone adzes, fire-hardened wooden pegs, and a good eye for terrain, they could be deployed by anyone in the group, even the youngest members who were strong enough to dig. So the next time you picture a primitive hunter wrestling a saber-tooth with his bare hands, remember that the real secret was a bit of engineering, a lot of patience, and an intimate knowledge of the landscape. The quick-fix, pit and spike trap turned the Ice Age's deadliest predator into a predictable, if still terrifying, part of the daily survival game. How did a band of Upper Paleolithic hunters pull themselves out of a sudden, life or death scramble when the prey turned on them, or when a hungry wolf pack slipped through the trees? The answer lies in a combination of terrain tricks, group choreography, and instinctive road maps that our ancestors carved into their brains long before anyone ever drew a modern escape plan. First, the hunters chose their hunting grounds with an eye toward a built-in exit. Archaeologists have mapped dozens of Stone Age kill sites and found that many are set on natural amphitheaters, rocky ridges, shallow valleys, or river bends that offer a single, clearly defined low point. When a mammoth or bison began to panic, the hunters would drive it toward that bottleneck. If the animal broke free, the same bottleneck served as a quick-draw corridor for the hunters to sprint away, because it limited the number of directions the animal could charge. In the caves of Chauvet and Lascaux, you can see faint scorch marks on the walls that line these narrow passages, evidence that fire was used to keep predators at bay while people slipped through the opening. Inside the group, a defensive formation called the Circle of Shields was common. Ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherers, such as the Sand of the Kalahari, show that when a large predator appears, the group drops to the ground, spreads out, and interlocks spears or wooden clubs to create a spiked perimeter. In Europe, Stone Age sites have yielded clusters of broken spear points and hafting stones that suggest they were deliberately placed in a circle, ready to be picked up and thrust outward at a moment's notice. The formation allowed every member to protect their vulnerable sides while still keeping an eye on the threat. When the danger was a fleeing herd rather than a predator, the hunters employed a rolling retreat. Imagine a line of people, each holding a heavy wooden club or a stone-tipped spear, moving backward in a coordinated step, like a military unit marching away from a battlefield. The rear runner would keep the fire, if they had a portable ember, low and tucked under a skin-covered pouch, while the front runners used their spears to keep the animal's momentum directed away from the group. This tactic is supported by wear patterns on spear shafts from sites in the Altai Mountains. The tips show repeated, shallow impacts consistent with striking a large animal's flank rather than a killing thrust. If a sudden snowstorm or a sudden drop in temperature threatened to freeze the party in place, the hunters had fallback shelters, natural overhangs, shallow caves, or even a hollowed-out tree trunk. Inside these shelters, they would stack animal hides and dry moss to create insulating layers, a practice documented in the remains of the Kostenki site where dozens of fox skins were found folded together. The shelters often had a single narrow entrance that could be quickly blocked with a fallen branch, turning the space into a makeshift bunker while the hunters regrouped or waited for daylight. Finally, the oldest emergency trick was the signal fire, a small, quickly ignitable pile of dry tinder placed at a pre-chosen high point. When a hunter signaled with a sharp rock strike, the tinder burst into flame, sending a bright, smoky plume visible for hundreds of meters. This served two purposes. It warned other bands in the area that a dangerous animal was on the loose, and it acted as a beacon for the fleeing hunters to converge on, ensuring that no one got lost in the forest maze. All of these strategies, terrain-based exits, circle formations, rolling retreats, fallback shelters, and signal fires, show that even without written manuals, Ice Age people possessed a sophisticated, instinctive playbook for turning a hunting disaster into a survivable escape. Their success wasn't luck. It was the result of generations of trial, error, and careful observation of the land and the beasts that roamed it. How did our Ice Age ancestors keep the wolves, bears, and saber-toothed cats from turning a successful hunt into a fatal dinner? The answer lies in a surprisingly sophisticated defensive toolkit that was as essential to survival as fire or clothing. First, the very layout of the campsite was a calculated risk reducer. Archaeologists have uncovered clusters of hearths surrounded by low stone walls or dugout trenches at sites like Mezherich in Ukraine. Those shallow ditches acted like ancient moats, funneling any prowling predator into a predictable path where a few well-placed spears or a sudden flare of fire could stop it dead in its tracks. The fire itself was the nighttime guardian. Burning embers left to smolder for hours emitted enough heat and light to deter most carnivores, and the crackle of a blaze signaled to a bear that the camp was defended. But fire and walls were only half the story. The Ice Age hunter-gatherer's social structure turned defense into a group sport. Evidence from bone assemblages shows that men, women, and even teenagers carried multiple projectile points, often tied to a single shaft for rapid reuse. When a predator approached, the group could unleash a volley of spears or atlatl darts from the safety of a raised platform or a shallow pit. This coordinated response is supported by wear patterns on stone points that indicate repeated, high-velocity impacts, exactly what you'd expect from defensive, not just hunting, use. Knowledge of predator behavior was passed down through generations, making elders indispensable. Older members remembered which bears were most aggressive after a fresh kill or which wolves hunted in packs at twilight, and they taught younger hunters the timing of danger windows. In turn, these elders helped the group decide when to move the camp, when to store meat in cold caches, and when to set up natural barriers using fallen logs or large stones. Finally, personal protective gear, though rudimentary, added another layer of safety. Thick hides sewn into simple aprons or padded with plant fibers protected the forearms and legs during a sudden charge. Some sites even reveal evidence of bone or antler armor, stitched onto clothing, a prehistoric version of a bulletproof vest designed to stop a claw or bite long enough for the group to rally. So, mastering predator defense wasn't just a side skill, it was the ultimate Ice Age life hack. By turning the landscape into a fortified arena, coordinating group tactics, leveraging the wisdom of elders, and even inventing primitive armor, our ancestors turned the night's most terrifying guests into manageable challenges. In a world where a single encounter could wipe out an entire band, that mastery meant the difference between a thriving clan and a fossil on the cave wall.